Imagine you were hanging off the side of a mountain in the pitch black. A blizzard is raging around you. Below you, attached to a rope, is your best friend. He has fallen over a cliff edge. You cannot see him, you cannot hear him, but you can feel his dead weight pulling you down. You are slipping. The snow under your feet is giving way. You have two choices. Choice 1. You hold on, and in a few minutes, gravity will pull both of you off the mountain to your deaths. Choice 2. You take out your knife, and you cut the rope. You send your friend into the abyss to save yourself. On a freezing night in 1985, Simon Yates had to make that choice. He cut the rope. Everyone, including Simon, thought his friend Joe Simpson was dead. Joe fell 150 feet into a glacial crevasse. His leg was shattered. He had no food, no water, and he was alone in the dark. But Joe Simpson didn't die. What followed is the single greatest survival story in the history of mountaineering. Joe Simpson and Simon Yates were young, fit, and ambitious. They didn't want to climb Everest. That was for tourists. They wanted a real challenge. They set their sights on the west face of Siula Grande in the Peruvian Andes. It is a 21,000-foot vertical wall of rock and ice that had never been climbed before. Many had tried, and all had failed. For the first 3 days, everything went according to plan. They moved fast and light. They climbed vertical ice walls, sleeping in snow caves dug into the side of the mountain. On the third day, they reached the summit. They stood on top of the world, elated. They had done the impossible. But in mountaineering, reaching the top is only half the journey. Most accidents happen on the way down, and their descent was about to turn into a nightmare. As they climbed down a knife-edge ridge, disaster struck. Joe swung his ice axe to secure a hold, but the ice shattered. He fell. It wasn't a long fall, maybe 20 feet. But he landed awkwardly on his right leg. The sound was sickening. A loud crack echoed across the silent mountain. Joe looked down. His lower leg bone had been driven up through his knee joint. His leg was shattered. In the death zone, a broken leg is usually a death sentence. You cannot walk. You cannot climb. And at that altitude, rescue is impossible. Simon looked at Joe. They both knew the unwritten rule of climbing. If you can't move, you are left behind. But Simon refused to leave his friend. He devised a plan. He would lower Joe down the mountain on a 300-foot rope, one agonizing section at a time. For hours, the plan worked. Simon would lower Joe 300 feet, then climb down to join him. It was excruciatingly painful for Joe. Every time his broken leg hit the ice, he screamed in agony. But they were making progress. They were getting closer to safety. Then the weather turned. A ferocious blizzard engulfed the mountain. Visibility dropped to 0. The temperature plummeted. In the darkness and confusion, Simon made a mistake. He lowered Joe over the edge of a vertical cliff. Joe was now dangling in midair, away from the wall. He couldn't touch the rock to take the weight off the rope. He couldn't climb back up, and because of the wind, he couldn't hear Simon screaming from above. Above him, Simon was in a desperate situation. He was sitting in a bucket seat dug into loose snow. He could feel Joe's weight pulling him off the mountain. He held on for over an hour. His hands were freezing. The snow was collapsing under him. He was sliding toward the edge. He screamed Joe's name into the storm. But there was no answer. Simon realized that if he held on any longer, they would both fall 3,000 feet to their deaths. He took a breath. He reached for his Swiss Army knife. With tears in his eyes, he cut the rope. Suddenly, the weight was gone. Simon was safe. But below him, Joe Simpson plummeted into the darkness. Joe didn't hit the bottom of the mountain. He fell into a crevasse, a massive crack in the glacier. He landed on a small ice ledge deep inside the earth. When he woke up, he was confused. He pulled on the rope, and the cut end fell into his lap. He realized what had happened. Simon had cut him loose. He was trapped in an ice tomb. He had a shattered leg. He had no food, no water, and he was alone in the dark. But Joe Simpson didn't die. He asked himself one question: what now? He had a choice. He could sit there and wait to freeze to death, or he could do something insane. He decided to lower himself deeper into the crevasse, hoping to find a way out at the bottom. It was a suicide mission, but he had to try. He lowered himself into the black void. Down, down, down. Miraculously, he found a snow ramp that led sideways. He crawled along it, squeezing through narrow gaps in the ice. Suddenly, he saw a beam of sunlight. He clawed his way towards it. He punched his ice axe into the snow and pulled his broken body upward. With one final heave, he pulled himself out of the crevasse and onto the surface of the glacier. He was out, but he wasn't safe. Joe was free from the ice, but he was still miles away from base camp. He was severely dehydrated. He was hallucinating, and he had to cross a glacier full of hidden traps, dragging a useless, shattered leg behind him. He couldn't walk, so he crawled. He developed a pattern. He would pick a rock in the distance and tell himself, "I will get to that rock in 20 minutes." He would crawl, screaming in pain with every movement, until he reached the rock. Then he would pick another one. For 3 days and nights, Joe Simpson crawled across the Andes. He ate snow to survive. He heard voices telling him to give up. He saw things that weren't there. Back at base camp, Simon was packing up. He had survived the descent. He was consumed by guilt. He was convinced he had killed his friend. He planned to leave the next morning. On the night before Simon was set to leave, Joe was close. He was delirious. He rolled into the rocky moraine near the camp. He couldn't shout anymore. His throat was parched. But as he lay there in the dark, he smelled something. The smell of burning waste from the camp latrines. It was the sweetest smell he had ever known. With the last ounce of his strength, he yelled Simon's name. Simon heard a noise in the dark. He thought he was going crazy. He thought it was the ghost of the friend he had murdered. He walked out into the dark with a torch. And there, crawling on the ground like a wild animal, was Joe Simpson. He had lost a third of his body weight. He looked like a skeleton, but he was alive. Joe Simpson survived against all odds. He spent months in the hospital and underwent multiple surgeries. Doctors told him he would never walk again, but he defied them too. He returned to climbing. And what about Simon Yates, the man who cut the rope? In the climbing community, Simon was criticized by some, but Joe Simpson defended him. Joe always said that if he was in Simon's shoes, he would have done the same thing. Simon didn't try to kill him, he tried to save the team. The story of Touching the Void is a testament to the terrifying pragmatism of survival. It asks us a question we are afraid to answer. What would you do to stay alive? Sometimes the strongest bond is the one you have to sever.